this very expensive myrrh and aloes. Myrrh was a syrupy substance that is like shellac. It's very aromatic. And they used a large sum of 100 pounds of it. And they coated each strip of linen as they wrapped the body, and they mixed that with this powdered sachet that was called aloes, a very, very expensive aromatic perfume in the powdered form. So they mixed it with that. They wrapped and coated these bandages. They wrapped Jesus like that. Well, what happened when you did this? You see, what would happen is within 24 hours, the myrrh would dry to a very hard substance. And it would actually encase the body in a very hard, tough cocoon of linen with this shellac-like substance now dried. Now, John tells us in great detail about that. Well, when the first believer in Jesus came to the tomb, it was Mary Magdalene, very early in the morning before anyone else. Mary came there and she saw the stone roll back and she saw the tomb was empty, and she just took a casual glance at the grave clothes and it scared her, and so she ran back and told the apostles that someone had stolen the body. So Peter and John, we're told in John 20, raced to get to the tomb. Well, John outran Peter because John was only a teenager. Peter was a little older. So John gets there first and he stoops down and he looks in kind of timidly, but he didn't quite understand what he was seeing. There are three different words for seeing used in the original Greek of that passage. Then Peter, in his typical brash fashion, dashes right on past him into the tomb, and it says that Peter looked at the grave clothes and he just stared at them, but the word used means he looked without understanding. He couldn't understand it. And then John came on in, and it says John theorized. It's theoreo, from the word from which we get theory. He looked at them analytically, and it says he looked analytically and believed. Believed what? He believed that Jesus had been raised from the dead. And then it goes on to say, for as yet he did not understand the Scripture which said that he must be raised from the dead. In other words, what this passage is showing us is that John believed on the basis of the conditions of those grave clothes alone. He didn't have any other reason for believing. What did he see? Well, you see, what he found in that tomb was these linen wrappings that were now in a tough case in exactly the shape of Jesus' body, but with no body in it. And he realized as he studied it that there was no way for anyone to get the body out of those grave clothes and leave them exactly intact. There was no way you could have tried to cut the body up. There's no way you could have gotten them out of there without cutting the grave clothes. So he saw a perfect cocoon of the body of Jesus, but with no body in it. Then he realized something supernatural had to have happened. As a matter of fact, we know that when Jesus was resurrected, his body took on another, it's physical, but it took on a higher form. And later, when he appeared to the disciples, they said they had the doors barred and everything else, and he just walked right through the wall, right on into the room. You're going to be able to do that someday, because you're going to have a body just like Jesus. That's what we're promised. The fact that he was raised from the dead is a guarantee that you and I will be. And so when they studied this, and the clincher for John, it says he saw the death napkin neatly folded and set over on the side. You see, Jesus apparently was very neat. And that was his little P.S., I'll see you later. So John saw that, and he realized that had to have been Jesus. He had to have come out of there somehow supernaturally, and he then just casually took the napkin, folded it neatly, and set it over on the side. Isn't that fantastic? Within a few days, these disciples were completely changed psychologically. They changed from being a bunch of wimps to being bold as lions. They went out into the same streets in which they had cowered when their Lord carried a cross through them. They went back out in the face of the same religious fanatics that they knew would kill them, and they proclaimed that Jesus was alive and that they had become murderers of the Messiah their prophets had predicted for centuries. And they were fearless. And when they were told to shut up or else we'll kill you, they said, we have to obey God and not men. And they went right back out and proclaimed it again. And Acts chapter 5 says that as a result of that, hundreds of the Jewish priests believed in Jesus. Why? Well, can you imagine if you lived in that time? You could take a 5-minute walk and go over the tomb and look at the evidence which had been sealed there so no one else could take it away. You could take a look at that and say, hey, wait a minute. This had to be something supernatural. They take a look at that, they remember the claim, and they believed. And this was against everything they had been taught. So it took powerful evidence to cause them to believe. Now, Funk says, Funk and gang, says that there's no historical evidence outside of the Bible that any of these things ever happened. Well, there is, and I'm going to read you some, but before I do, I want to say that the Bible is the best evidence that you can get of anything in recorded history of the ancient times. So I'm not putting the Bible aside and saying, well, this is not adequate, I'm going to something that's more adequate. I studied, well, my major was New Testament Greek. And I studied for 5 years the evidence of those Greek manuscripts. And not only did I study it for myself, I studied what much greater scholars than I'll ever be had said about it. But I read the actual manuscripts that date back to within 100, well, one of them dates back to within 25 years of the apostles. And I found that on the basis of what the manuscript evidence alone, that scholars down through history have said that we have more evidence to establish the veracity of every chapter of the New Testament than we have evidence that Alexander the Great ever lived. Now, no one questions that. That's how good the evidence is. Now, Funk says that, okay, so we have these records, and they were written early by the apostles, but they just dreamed up all of this. Well, now we have to go back to the determined animosity of the opposition to refute that. These facts were all proclaimed in the streets of Jerusalem. Within 10 years of the crucifixion of Jesus, Matthew wrote a Hebrew version of the Gospel of Matthew. He later wrote a Greek version. If those Jewish religious leaders could have done anything to disprove any fact of this, they would have done so, and we wouldn't have a Christian religion today. It was a very fragile movement. But they didn't. The only evidence they ever advanced was that the disciples came and stole the body away. And you know what malarkey that is. They never did. But, let me read you. This is from the Harvard Classical Series. This is the writings of Tertullian, who was a Latin lawyer who lived between 150 and 220 A.D. I'm going to read you a famous defense that Tertullian made before the Roman Senate in 210 AD. And he did this in order to contest the fact